Hello, and thanks for choosing this episode, Replacing Interior Door Slabs and Leave Those Frames Alone, from PJ's Free Advice, where it's always worth every penny. So my wife came to me and said, these doors are looking pretty tired. It's time to do something with the doors. However, we like the door frames just the way they are. Can you do that? And said, yes, dear, which I say a lot. Yes, dear, we can do that. So what you're going to see later on is how we went from the doors on the left to the doors on the right, simply by using door slabs, which is probably less than half the price of getting the doors with the jambs that come with them. So the tools you're going to need, by the way, all these tools I picked up at Home Depot. You can use any store you'd like. This is not an advertiser for Home Depot. This part right here is a jig, and the jig is made for the lock sets themselves. This is a tool that is a self-centering screw starter. It drills a little hole, but what's nice about this tool is it self-centers that hole in the middle exactly where you want it, so that's a very good tool to have for this. There's also another jig that you can use with your router, and this is what we use for setting the lock set in the edge of the door. And then this is actually for the door hinges, which is another jig that you can pick up at Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you want to pick up. By the way, these two jigs do come with their own bits that goes into your router, so it's good little kits. So the tools you'll need, it's always helpful to have two drills. One drill is for the screw starter, the other drill is obviously for the Phillips, your router, your square, Phillips and a regular screwdriver, ball peen hammer, Sharpie, and a pencil. And that pencil, by the way, is a carpenter's pencil, and I have it where it's cut to a point, a flat point, because you want to be very exact with that pencil. So the thing that you'll see later on in this presentation is I also made up a couple of holders for the door to set up on edge, because it's easier to route when it's on edge. You don't want to do it with the door between your knees because it's kind of dangerous that way. Just measure the width, or the width of the, not the width, but the thickness of the door, and add about 1/4 inch to it, so they'll slide right into these two holders here that they're shown. And this is just spare 4x4s and a couple of 2x4s, so, but it'll work out really well, and you'll see later on how that works. First, you'll need a nice big work table. Sometimes the routing, we'll have to lay the door on the table for the routing, and it's just good to have a big work table to do that with. On the left, before you start, take a Sharpie and measure, or not measure, but mark the top of the doors, and mark them on both the hinge side and on the latch side. This is very important. I can't tell you how easy this makes it when you're out there in the shop working on this, knowing which is the top and which is the bottom. Also, the original lock sets may not be perfectly centered within your strike, which is built into the jamb. So now that we're going to be putting in new lock set holes, now's a good time to center those up. Just take that Sharpie and just mark where the existing door strike is on your jamb, because that door strike is not going to be replaced or removed. It's going to stay the same. So with the markings done, go ahead and remove your lock set. Of course, you do the door handle first. Once you slide them out, then the lock set, you take the screws out of it, the lock set. Okay, now it's time to pop the doors off. Sometimes those hinge pins take a little nudging with a screwdriver and your hammer, and you just gently tap them until they come out. Now, the picture on the right, you'll see that the door is removed and ready to be carried out to the shop. Once out in the shop, I set these doors edge to edge, and then make sure that the top of the door is flush from your new door, which is the bottom one, and your old door, which is the top one. Remember the old door I told you to mark? This is why. Now on our new door, because of the pattern on it, I know what the top is just by looking at the door. But with a flat or plain slab door, it's really hard to tell top from bottom, so that mark really helps. So just make sure that the tops of the doors, because that's where everything is referenced from, is the top of the door. So once you measure the top, you may notice if you go on down to the other end, the bottom of the doors. My doors were 79.5 inches tall. There was a 1/2 inch gap underneath to allow for carpeting. New doors will come at 80 inches. So you might as well just go ahead and mark your line now while they're lined up against each other. Remember, the top is already lined up. Go ahead and mark with a pencil that 1/2 inch at the bottom that needs to be trimmed off later on in the presentation. So now we're going to transfer where the location of the hinges and the lock sets are onto the new door. So if you notice on the left-hand picture, I took the center screw, and then you find the center of it. In fact, it even helps to turn that screw a little bit so it's angled just like this. Find the center of that screw and make the mark on the new door below it. So the picture on the right shows that hinge is perfectly centered with that mark on the new door, which is the white door. And if you notice the line, the horizontal line going by, that tells me later on that that part is the orientation of the hinge. That's important because as you're going through, like I did 12 doors in 2 days, as you're going through, what you don't want to do is router out the hinges in the wrong direction. So that line is my little reminder that, hey, this is where the hinge is going to stop. It's very important to put that in there. At this point, you've got all 3 hinges. My doors have 3 hinges. Yours may only have 2. I go ahead and take the hinges off. And as I take them off, on the back side of them, I put in their top, middle, and bottom, and lay those hinges to the side. Right now, at this point, you want to take the doors, keep the top oriented the correct way, take the doors, flip them over, and now we're on the lock set side. So on the lock set side, do you remember that mark that we had before? And you can tell on this, on the old door on the left, the mark is a little bit above the lock set. That's because we marked it against the strike. So as we mark and pencil these in, you see that the new pencil in marks on the white door, the new door, are exactly where the strike is going to be. So you measure one side, measure the other. Now it's time to go ahead and set the old door aside. Don't prop it up or do away with it because we're going to use it for another thing down the road. But now go ahead and slip the new door into those holders that I was telling you about, made out of the 4x4s and 2x4s. Okay. On that lock set, you'll notice it is an 1 inch and 3/8 between the top and bottom markers. So what I did was right in the center, which is 1 inch and 3/16, I make another separate mark, and that's actually the very center of the lock set. The old door that you set aside, this is actually the hinge jig, and you should do this for the hinge jig and the lock set jig. I'm getting ready to do the hinges. So what I did is I took the hinge jig, that piece on the bottom, and actually put it on the old door. I loosened up the router and let it rest at the bottom where the hinge would be. That gives me my depth for the hinge depths on the new door. So use this as your template, right? So on my router, that lever on the top, that black lever, you flip it over, let the router slide down. When it sits on the surface where the hinge was on the old door, then lock that in and you've got your depth set. This is the hinge router jig, and you notice on the left-hand side there's a little indent. That indent is what you line up with the mark that you made before to go ahead and route your door hinges in. And you notice the radiuses. My hinges have those radiuses. Your hinges may be squared, so your jig may be a little bit different. But on mine, they were radiused on the edge. But you notice my mark there that shows me where the hinge goes as far as right or left of the door. This is proving to me that I've got the jig set on the right side of the door, on the correct side of the door. What it will look like after you've run the router through. It only takes a little bit. Always start on the edge of the door first. It seems to work better. And once you're done, this is what it should look like. And what I do is I go ahead and set one of those hinges in just to make sure that the depth is okay. And you can tell by this picture the depth is perfect, so we're good to go. So at this point I can take the jig off. Remember that very important tool, the centering tool. This is the top hinge. This is important. This is the top hinge, and the first screw that I will set in will be the middle screw, and that way it sets it, and I can just do the two other screws later. So with the self-centering drill bit, it pops right in that hinge because of the recess on the hinge, the hole. Set right in, you drill your pilot hole, and you can notice that's what the tool does for you. It automatically directly centers that pilot hole for the screw. That center screw is done. Do the same for the other two screws. And again, this is the top hinge only. Do not do the other two hinges. Let me go back up. You can tell as I'm looking, the top of the door is the one that's facing me. I now have the top hinge in, but you can tell down the door, the middle hinge and the bottom hinges are not placed in. This is important not to put those in right now, because the way we're going to install this door, remember your other half of the hinge is still in the door jamb, and those hinges have just a small amount of clearance, and if you get a little bit off, it's not going to slide in. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use that top hinge. We're going to hang the door when we're done, let it hang, move the other two hinges around, drill our pilot holes, and mount the screws. And this is for the lock set. We've already done the hinges. Now I've laid the door up on the table, and this is the lock set. Now, you notice the mark that I had made before, which is the very center of the lock set. That's the mark that is used for the jig on the right-hand side, and it sits right there in the center. Tighten up your jig per the manufacturer's instructions and start to drill away, okay? I drill through until the pilot bit goes through the other side, and then I lift the door up, and then I finish drilling out the hole from the other side. This keeps it from tearing. I will say, while you're doing this, whether it's the doorknob hole or the lock set, the strike hole, your bit is going to get clogged up. And so what you have to do about 4 or 5 times while you're doing this, you got to pull the bit out, take your hand, brush off all that stuff that's on the bit, make the bit clean again, and then just vacuum out the hole where you're doing it. It only takes a second. You just pull it out, brush it off, vacuum it out, and go back to drilling again. Otherwise, you'll sit there and drill. Sometimes you can see smoke. You don't want that to happen. So I've got the door knob hole done, and now it's time to put in the lock set hole. And again, the jig has it already lined up for you. You don't have to move it or anything. There's the mark still on the left. Excuse me. And go ahead and do this. Now on this one, again, you're going to have to pull that bit out 4 or 5 times, clean it off, vacuum it out before it'll actually break through. On the right-hand side, that's your finished product, okay? And it's already centered. Now you can take that door off the table and put it back into the floor stand so it's vertical. Now we're getting ready to use the door latch jig for your router. So as you can see, put the jig on first on the left-hand side, and it comes with this handy little tool. That little protrusion there will slip down into the center of the jig and will center the jig. Don't tighten it up yet, but it will center the jig into the hole that you've just drilled out. So on the right-hand side, the jig is now, the center part is pushed in, it's centered, and now we can go ahead and clamp this down, and we're ready to route this out. Again, on the router, you want to set this jig up on your old door and see what the depth was for the lock set itself, and then transfer that over to this. I did on the router bit for the lock sets was, I don't know if you can see this, but on the left-hand side, I actually put a black mark so that every time I do this, remember I had 12 doors, every time I did this, I just put the router bit in up to that black mark, and I knew I was pretty good to go, but I still went ahead and confirmed it anyway on the old door. On the right-hand side, this is the finished product. You got your recess in, and that sure beats doing it with a hammer and chisel or a screwdriver and chisel. And it is centered to the strike plate that you still have in the house. Now again, I take the door, set it back up on the table. There's that 1/2 inch that I have to cut off the bottom. So I just take a circular saw and I use a blade that is very fine and does not chew up the door itself. And once that's cut, then take your sandpaper. I like to sand off the edges, kind of round them a little bit, make sure that there's no splinters on those door edges. Now, it's time to take that door in, and let's hang that door in the door jamb, okay? So the first thing is, take those other 2 hinges, the ones marked middle and the ones marked bottom, put the pins in and hang them in the door jamb. Allows you to go ahead and get pre-set up to hanging that door. Take the door, that is the top hinge on the right, take the door, put the pin in, and hang the door, the brand new door, and hang it on that top hinge only. When that door is hanging there, just be careful with it because you're only hanging it on one hinge. You want to take, this is what the middle hinge on the left looks like. Okay, there's your routed area for it. Just swing over that middle hinge and check for fit, but it should fit right into that routed in recess that you made on those doors. Now, that router is going to give you about a 1/16 of an inch of play, and that's what you really need to get this done. So on the right-hand side, I have swung that over, and you can see that I've already made sure it fits on the middle and the top, the bottom hinges, and gone ahead and put 1 screw in, okay, in each hinge. So I got 1 screw in here, 1 screw down below, using that center, that bit that has the centering pilot hole bit. Go ahead and put 1 screw in, and then close the door and make sure everything's lined up, make sure everything's perfect before you put anything else in. You may have to take the door off and do a little trimming on it, we don't know, but that's why you only want to put 1 screw in. And after this screw is in, and you've checked the door and you checked everything and it fits fine, go ahead and put the other 2 screws in this hinge, and then down below on the bottom hinge, go ahead and put the other 2 screws in it. Put the door hardware back on the door, close it, and hopefully that's the way it turns out for you. So I hope this has been a good lesson. A lot of thought went into this in actually trying to build this. So anyway, I'm just hoping it helps someone out there. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great day.